Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Be sure to let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get straight into the True Scary Stories compilation. Story 1. Midnight Playground. The sound of children laughing echoed through the empty playground at midnight. I was jolted awake by the eerie, cheerful noise. My heart pounded in my chest as I glanced at the clock on my nightstand, 12:03 a.m. Who could be out there at this hour? My small suburban neighborhood was usually silent after dark, and the playground should have been deserted. Curiosity and concern gnawed at me. I got out of bed, slipping on a pair of shoes and grabbing my flashlight. My husband, Tom, stirred slightly but didn't wake. I hesitated for a moment, considering waking him, but decided against it. I didn't want to alarm him over what was probably just some teenagers playing a prank. The night was cool and still as I stepped outside. The laughter continued, growing louder and more distinct. It sent a chill down my spine. I walked down the street, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The closer I got to the playground, the more I felt an inexplicable sense of dread. As I approached the gate, I saw the swings moving on their own, back and forth, as if unseen children were playing. My breath caught in my throat. There was no wind, nothing to explain the movement. The laughter persisted, an eerie, disembodied sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I stepped through the gate, my flashlight flickering as if struggling against some unseen force. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is anyone there?" The laughter stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. The swing sets continued to move, their creaking chains the only sound in the night. I scanned the playground, searching for any sign of life. The merry-go-round spun slowly, its rusty joints squealing. The slides and jungle gym stood ominously, bathed in the pale light of the full moon. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Something was very wrong. A rustling sound caught my attention, and I swung the flashlight towards the source. The beam landed on a figure standing by the sandbox. A small child, no older than 8, with long, dark hair obscuring their face. My heart raced as I took a cautious step forward. "Hey, are you okay? Where are your parents?" The child didn't respond. Instead, they turned and walked slowly towards the swings. I followed, a sense of unease growing with each step. As I got closer, I realized the child's feet didn't touch the ground, they hovered just above it, gliding silently. My blood ran cold. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice breaking. The child paused, turning to face me. As they lifted their head, I saw their eyes, dark, empty voids that seemed to suck in all light. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. The laughter started again, louder and more mocking, as if it were coming from the very shadows. Panicked, I turned to run, but the gate slammed shut with a force that rattled the metal fence. I was trapped. The swings began to move more violently, the chains clanging like sinister chimes. The child vanished, leaving me alone in the haunted playground. Desperation clawed at me as I tried to pry the gate open. It wouldn't budge. I turned back, my flashlight flickering again. The merry-go-round spun faster, and I could see shadowy figures now, indistinct forms that seemed to dance and play, their laughter a cacophony of horror. I fell to my knees, covering my ears, trying to block out the maddening sound. The air grew colder, and a dense fog began to roll in, obscuring my view. I felt a presence behind me, a cold breath on my neck. Slowly, I turned, the flashlight barely illuminating the figure now looming over me. It was the child, but their face had changed, twisted into a grotesque grin. "Come play with us," they whispered, their voice echoing with countless others. "Stay with us forever." "Stay with us forever," the child whispered, the sinister grin spreading across their face. My heart pounded as the air around me seemed to thicken. I scrambled to my feet, backing away from the haunting figure. The laughter of invisible children echoed through the playground, a cacophony of malice. "No," I managed to gasp, shaking my head. "I won't stay." The child's grin widened, and they tilted their head to one side. "But you belong here now," they said, their voice layered with countless others. As I backed away, I felt the chill deepen, the temperature dropping so rapidly my breath became visible in the moonlight. I turned and bolted toward the merry-go-round, now spinning furiously. The shadowy figures danced around it, their forms shifting and blending with the darkness. Panic clawed at my throat as I struggled to find a way out. The gate was still firmly shut, the chains rattling ominously. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my arm. I screamed, jerking away and shining the flashlight toward the source. It was Tom. Relief flooded through me, though his face was pale and etched with worry. "Emily, what are you doing out here?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the eerie laughter. "Tom, we need to get out of here," I said, grabbing his hand and pulling him toward the gate. "Something is wrong. The playground, it's haunted or cursed or something." He looked at me skeptically but didn't argue. Together, we pushed against the gate with all our strength. For a moment, it resisted, but then it swung open with a loud creak. We stumbled through, and as soon as we were outside, the oppressive feeling lifted slightly. The laughter faded, leaving an eerie silence. We hurried back to the house, locking the doors and drawing the curtains. Tom watched me closely, concern in his eyes. "Emily, what happened out there?" he asked, his voice softening. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I shivered, recounting the events as best as I could. Tom listened, his expression shifting from disbelief to horror. When I finished, he took a deep breath. "We need to find out what's going on. This isn't normal." We spent the next day researching the history of the playground and the neighborhood. Digging through old records and news articles, we found a tragic story that sent chills down our spines. Decades ago, a fire had swept through the playground, killing several children who had been playing there after dark. Their bodies were never found, and the playground had been rebuilt over the ashes of the old one. "Do you think their spirits are still there?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Are they the ones haunting the playground?" Tom nodded slowly. "It sounds like it. But why now? Why are they reaching out to us?" That night, we decided to return to the playground, armed with a plan to confront whatever was haunting it. We brought candles, a voice recorder, and a camera, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural presence. As midnight approached, we felt a sense of dread settle over us. We set up the equipment around the swings, the playground eerily silent. The moment the clock struck 12, the laughter began again, echoing through the darkness. The swings moved on their own, and the merry-go-round spun slowly. "Show yourselves," Tom called out, his voice firm. "We want to help you." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the fog rolled in, thicker than before. The temperature dropped, and the shadowy figures appeared once more. The child from the night before stepped forward, their empty eyes locking onto mine. "Why are you here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you want?" The child raised a hand, pointing to the sandbox. "Our bodies are there," they said, their voice a haunting echo. "Find us. Set us free." I glanced at Tom, who nodded. We approached the sandbox, starting to dig with our hands. The ground was cold and hard, but we kept going. The laughter grew louder, more urgent, and I felt a sense of desperation from the spirits. Suddenly, my hand hit something solid. I pulled back the dirt to reveal a small, charred bone. Tom found another, and together we unearthed the remains of the children. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to press in on us. "Set us free," the child whispered again, their voice filled with longing. "Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories." As the last of the charred bones came to light, the air grew even colder, and the laughter ceased. The shadows around us stilled, as if watching and waiting. Tom and I exchanged a glance, our breath visible in the frigid air. "We need to give them a proper burial," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. We carefully gathered the bones and placed them in a blanket, handling them with the reverence they deserved. The shadowy figures hovered near the sandbox, their presence a palpable weight. The child with the empty eyes watched us closely, their expression unreadable. "We'll take care of you," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if they could hear me. Tom and I left the playground and drove to the cemetery, the remains of the children resting gently in the back seat. The drive was silent, the weight of our task heavy on our minds. When we arrived, we found a quiet corner of the cemetery and began to dig a grave. As we worked, the wind picked up, howling through the trees. It felt as if the spirits were guiding us, urging us to hurry. Once the grave was deep enough, we laid the bones to rest and covered them with earth. I placed a makeshift marker at the head of the grave, a simple wooden cross we had found in the car. "Rest in peace," Tom said softly, his voice carrying over the wind. "You're free now." We stood in silence for a moment, hoping our efforts had brought the spirits some measure of peace. The oppressive feeling began to lift, and the air grew warmer. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, as if the spirits were finally at rest. As we walked back to the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching us. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the child standing at the edge of the cemetery, their empty eyes fixed on me. They lifted a hand in a slow, deliberate wave before fading into the darkness. We returned home, exhausted but hopeful that the nightmare was over. The next day, the playground was quiet, and the swings were still. It seemed our efforts had worked. The laughter and the eerie presence were gone, and the neighborhood returned to its normal, peaceful self. However, that night, I was jolted awake by a familiar sound, the laughter of children. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat up, listening intently. The clock read 12:03 a.m. I shook Tom awake, and he groggily followed me downstairs. The sound was faint but unmistakable, coming from the direction of the playground. We grabbed our flashlight and headed outside, our dread returning with each step. When we reached the playground, the swings were moving on their own again, and the laughter echoed through the empty night. The shadowy figures were back, more distinct than before, their forms clearer and more menacing. The child appeared once more, their empty eyes boring into mine. "You set us free," they said, their voice a chilling whisper. "But now you must pay the price." I felt a cold hand grip my arm, and I yanked away, stumbling back. "What do you want from us?" I cried, my voice shaking with fear. The child stepped forward, their expression twisted into a sinister smile. "You disturbed our rest. Now you must join us." Tom grabbed my hand, and we backed away slowly, the realization dawning on us. The spirits were not at peace, they were angry. The ritual we performed had not freed them, it had only awakened their wrath. The shadows closed in, their laughter a mocking echo in the darkness. Desperation fueled our steps as we fled the playground, the gate slamming shut behind us. The laughter followed us home, a relentless reminder of our mistake. Inside, we locked the doors and huddled together, but the sense of foreboding was stronger than ever. "We have to find another way," Tom said, his voice filled with determination. "There must be something we missed." We spent the next day researching again, combing through the old records and articles. Buried in the back pages of an old newspaper, we found a story about a ritual designed to appease vengeful spirits. It required a personal item from each of the deceased, something they had cherished in life. "We need to find their belongings," I said, feeling a glimmer of hope. "It's the only way to truly set them free." That night, we returned to the playground, armed with the knowledge of the new ritual. The spirits were waiting for us, their laughter echoing in the still night. The child with the empty eyes watched as we began to dig once more, searching for the items that would finally bring them peace. The child with the empty eyes watched us as we dug, their presence a constant, oppressive weight. Tom and I worked quickly, uncovering the ground around the sandbox. We had to find the personal items of the children if we were to have any hope of appeasing the spirits. The laughter echoed around us, growing louder and more malicious with each passing minute. "Here," Tom said suddenly, pulling something from the dirt. It was a small, charred teddy bear, its fur blackened and singed. "This must have belonged to one of them." I nodded, my hands trembling as I continued to dig. Soon, we found more items: a doll, a toy car, a small book with burnt edges. Each discovery brought a wave of sadness and guilt. These were the cherished possessions of the children whose lives had been so tragically cut short. "We have to perform the ritual now," I said, my voice shaking. "Before it's too late." We gathered the items and set them in a circle in the middle of the playground. The child with the empty eyes stood at the edge, their gaze unblinking. The other shadowy figures hovered nearby, their forms growing clearer in the flickering light of the candles we had brought. Tom took my hand, and we began to chant the incantation we had found, our voices steady despite the fear gnawing at our hearts. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to press in on us. The laughter ceased, replaced by an eerie silence that was somehow more terrifying. The ground trembled as we continued the chant, the personal items glowing with a faint, otherworldly light. The spirits moved closer, their expressions a mix of anger and longing. The child with the empty eyes stepped forward, their hand reaching out toward the circle. "Take them," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Take these items and find peace." The child's hand hovered over the teddy bear, and for a moment, I thought we had succeeded. But then, their expression twisted into one of rage. "It's not enough," they hissed, their voice a chorus of tormented souls. "You disturbed our rest. You must join us." The candles went out, plunging us into darkness. The shadowy figures closed in, their forms now solid and menacing. I felt a cold hand grip my arm, and I screamed, trying to pull away. Tom was beside me, fighting off the shadows that clawed at him. "We have to leave," he shouted, his voice filled with desperation. We ran, the spirits chasing us with relentless fury. The gate to the playground was still open, and we bolted through it, the laughter of the children echoing in our ears. As we reached the safety of our home, the sense of dread lifted slightly, but we knew we weren't safe. That night, the laughter followed us, echoing through the walls of our house. The spirits were furious, and their presence grew stronger with each passing hour. We knew we had to do something drastic if we were to survive. "There's one last thing we can try," Tom said, his voice grim. "We have to return the spirits to the place where they died. Only then will they find peace." It was a desperate plan, but it was our only hope. We gathered the personal items and returned to the playground one final time. The spirits were waiting, their expressions filled with rage. The child with the empty eyes watched us closely as we approached. "We're here to set you free," I said, my voice trembling. "Please, take these items and find peace." We placed the items in the sandbox, covering them with the dirt we had dug up. The air grew colder, and the spirits closed in, their forms more menacing than ever. The ground trembled as we completed the ritual, our voices steady despite the fear gnawing at our hearts. Suddenly, the spirits screamed, a sound of pure anguish that pierced the night. The ground shook violently, and the air grew colder. The shadowy figures began to fade, their forms dissolving into the darkness. The child with the empty eyes looked at us one last time, their expression one of sorrow and regret. "Thank you," they whispered, their voice filled with longing. "We can rest now." As the last of the spirits faded, the air grew warmer, and the oppressive feeling lifted. The playground was silent, and the swings were still. We had finally set the spirits free. But as we turned to leave, a cold breeze swept through the playground, and I heard a faint whisper. "Stay with us forever." We looked at each other in horror, realizing that the spirits were not gone, they had merely passed their curse onto us. We were bound to the playground, trapped in a never-ending nightmare. The laughter of the children echoed through the empty playground at midnight, and we knew we would never escape. Story 2. The Haunting Shadow. Ever since moving into the old Victorian house, I felt an unshakable presence. At first, it was subtle, a flicker of shadows in the corner of my vision, the soft creak of floorboards at night. But soon, it became impossible to ignore. Every night, as I lay in bed, I felt an overwhelming sense of being watched. It was as if the darkness itself had eyes. The first time I saw the figure, I thought it was a trick of the light. My eyes, heavy with sleep, had barely closed when I sensed something at the foot of my bed. I opened my eyes, and there it was, a dark silhouette, featureless and silent. I blinked, and it was gone. I chalked it up to my imagination, a remnant of a half-dream, and tried to sleep. The next night, it happened again. This time, the figure lingered longer. I stared at it, my heart pounding in my chest, waiting for it to move, to do something. But it just stood there, watching me. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones. I turned on the bedside lamp, and the figure vanished as if it had never been there. I told my friends about it, hoping for some rational explanation. "It's just stress," Claire said, sipping her coffee. "You've been working too hard. Your mind's playing tricks on you." Others suggested sleep paralysis or even an overactive imagination. I wanted to believe them, but the figure felt too real, too tangible. One night, desperate for a solution, I set up a camera in my room. I needed proof, something to validate my fears. I reviewed the footage the next morning with shaking hands. There it was, a shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but it was unmistakably there. I felt a chill run down my spine. I began to dread bedtime, knowing the figure would be there, watching. I tried staying up, keeping the lights on, but exhaustion always won. I even considered moving, but the house was all I could afford. I felt trapped, both in the house and by the presence that haunted my nights. Then, last night, everything changed. I had just closed my eyes when I heard it, a whisper, barely audible, yet clear as day. "You'll never wake up again," it said, its voice cold and hollow. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. I forced myself to open my eyes, and there it was, closer than ever before. The figure's presence was suffocating, its threat echoing in my mind. I didn't sleep after that. I couldn't. The fear was too intense, the whisper too haunting. As dawn broke, I knew I had to do something, anything, to rid myself of this malevolent presence. The question was, how? Hey, subscribe for more scary stories. I spent the day in a fog of exhaustion and fear. Every creak of the house set my nerves on edge, and I jumped at every shadow. I knew I couldn't endure another night like the last. Something had to change, and it had to change now. I began my search for answers by diving into the history of the house. It didn't take long to uncover a string of unsettling events. The house had been owned by the Barrow family for generations, each occupant seemingly more troubled than the last. Suicides, disappearances, and madness all had plagued this place. The most recent tragedy was the death of Jonathan Barrow, who had been found dead in his bed, eyes wide open in terror. I reached out to a local historian, Mr. Caldwell, who agreed to meet me at the town library. He was an elderly man, with kind eyes and a wealth of knowledge. "The Barrow house has always been peculiar," he said, sipping his tea. "There are stories of a dark figure seen by those who live there, a shadowy presence that drove them to the brink of insanity. Why does it target people?" I asked, desperate for any clue. Mr. Caldwell sighed, setting his cup down. "Some say it's the spirit of Jonathan Barrow himself, trapped in a cycle of torment and despair. Others believe it's something far older, something malevolent that feeds on fear and suffering." His words chilled me to the bone. I thanked him and hurried home, my mind racing with possibilities. I decided to confront the entity directly. If it was Jonathan Barrow, perhaps I could communicate with him, find out what he wanted. If it was something else, well, I didn't have a plan for that. That evening, I gathered a few items I thought might help, a flashlight, a journal, and a small crucifix my grandmother had given me. I sat on my bed, feeling both foolish and terrified. "Jonathan Barrow," I called out, my voice trembling. "If you're here, I want to help you. Tell me what you want." The silence that followed was oppressive, pressing down on me from all sides. I waited, heart pounding, until I felt a chill wash over me. The figure appeared at the foot of my bed, darker than the shadows around it. I gripped the crucifix tightly. "Please," I whispered. "Tell me what you want." The figure didn't move, but the air grew colder. I felt a strange pressure in my head, a sense of being overwhelmed by emotions not my own. Fear, anger, sorrow, they crashed over me in waves, nearly suffocating me. Then, I heard the whisper again, clearer this time. "Leave." "Why?" I demanded. "Why do you want me to leave?" The figure didn't answer, but I felt its anger intensify. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, and the lights flickered. I felt a presence, something dark and ancient, pressing down on me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. In a last, desperate act, I clutched the crucifix and whispered a prayer. The pressure lifted suddenly, and the figure vanished. I gasped for air, trembling uncontrollably. I knew then that this was no restless spirit seeking closure. This was something far worse, something that wanted me gone at any cost. As the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, I realized that I had to find a way to banish this entity. My life depended on it. The next morning, I felt like a shell of myself, hollowed out by fear and exhaustion. My nights were becoming a battleground, and I knew I couldn't last much longer. I needed help, but who could I turn to? The local church? A psychic? I decided to go with the latter, hoping they might have experience with such malevolent forces. I found a psychic named Eliza, known for her work with troubled spirits. She agreed to visit the house that afternoon. When she arrived, I was struck by how normal she seemed, no crystal balls or flowing robes, just a kind woman with an air of quiet confidence. Eliza walked through the house, her expression growing more serious with each room. Finally, she stood in my bedroom, the epicenter of the disturbances. "There is a dark presence here," she said, her voice low. "It's ancient and powerful, feeding on your fear." "What can I do?" I asked, my desperation evident. Eliza's gaze was steady. "We must perform a ritual to cleanse the house. It will be dangerous, but it's the only way to banish this entity." We spent the rest of the day preparing. Eliza gave me a list of items to gather: candles, salt, herbs, and a mirror. She explained that the mirror would act as a portal, trapping the entity and allowing us to banish it. By dusk, everything was ready. As night fell, we began the ritual. Eliza drew a circle of salt around the bed, placing candles at the cardinal points. The air grew thick with the scent of burning sage and rosemary. Eliza instructed me to hold the mirror while she chanted an incantation in a language I didn't recognize. The room grew colder, and the shadows seemed to deepen. I felt the now familiar sense of dread, but this time it was stronger, almost palpable. The figure appeared, more defined and menacing than ever. It stood at the edge of the salt circle, glaring at us with unseen eyes. "Hold the mirror steady," Eliza commanded, her voice unwavering. I gripped the mirror tightly, my hands shaking. The figure reached out, as if testing the boundaries of the circle. Eliza's chant grew louder, more insistent. The figure recoiled, a look of fury in its shadowy form. The air crackled with tension. Suddenly, the figure lunged at me. I felt a cold, icy grip around my wrist, and I cried out in pain. The mirror shook in my hands, but I held on, focusing on Eliza's voice. The candles flickered wildly, and the temperature plummeted. I could see my breath in the air. Eliza's chant reached a crescendo, and the figure let out a soundless scream. I felt a surge of energy, a force pushing against me. The mirror glowed with an eerie light, and the figure was pulled toward it, struggling against an invisible force. With one final push, the entity was sucked into the mirror, disappearing with a blinding flash. The room fell silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting instantly. I collapsed onto the bed, gasping for breath. Eliza looked exhausted but relieved. "It's done," she said softly. "The entity is trapped in the mirror. We must bury it far away from here." We wrapped the mirror carefully, and in the early hours of the morning, drove to a secluded spot in the woods. We dug a deep hole and buried the mirror, hoping it would never be found. As we covered it with earth, I felt a sense of peace for the first time in weeks. But as we turned to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, something that wasn't entirely gone. For a few days, I almost convinced myself it was over. The house felt lighter, the oppressive atmosphere gone. I slept soundly, free from the haunting presence that had tormented me for so long. Eliza had warned me that the entity might try to return, but I clung to the hope that we had succeeded. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed with a text message from Eliza. "I have a bad feeling. Be cautious." My heart skipped a beat. I reassured myself that it was just her being overly cautious. I locked all the doors and windows and went to bed, trying to ignore the lingering unease. Around midnight, I awoke to a strange sensation. The room felt colder, the air heavy with an unseen presence. My eyes snapped open, and my blood ran cold. The figure was back, standing at the foot of my bed, more menacing than ever. It didn't move, didn't speak, but I could feel its anger radiating towards me. I fumbled for my phone, desperate to call Eliza, but the screen was unresponsive, the battery inexplicably drained. Panic set in as I realized I was alone, with no way to call for help. The figure took a step closer, its form becoming more defined, more terrifying. "Why are you back?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure remained silent, but the room grew colder, the walls seeming to close in on me. I grabbed the crucifix from my nightstand, holding it out in front of me. "Leave me alone." The figure recoiled slightly, but then seemed to gather strength, pushing against the barrier of my will. I remembered Eliza's words about the entity feeding on fear. I needed to stay calm, to show no fear, but it was nearly impossible. The figure loomed closer, its presence overwhelming. Desperate, I began to recite the incantation Eliza had used during the ritual. My voice wavered, but I forced myself to keep going. The figure paused, as if listening, then advanced again. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. The incantation wasn't working. I racked my brain for any other options. Eliza had mentioned that sometimes, confronting the entity with its past could weaken it. "Jonathan Barrow," I said, my voice shaking. "If that's who you are, I want to help you. Tell me what you want." The figure stopped. For a moment, I thought I saw something in its shadowy form, a glimmer of humanity, of recognition. Then it spoke, its voice a cold whisper. "You cannot help me. You are mine." A sudden, sharp pain pierced my chest, and I gasped, clutching at my heart. The room spun, and I fell to my knees, the crucifix slipping from my grasp. The figure loomed over me, its presence suffocating. I felt my strength ebbing away, my vision darkening. Just as I thought I would lose consciousness, a blinding light filled the room. The figure shrieked, a sound of pure agony, and recoiled. Eliza stood in the doorway, holding a mirror similar to the one we had buried. "I told you to be cautious," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "This ends now." Eliza chanted the incantation, and the figure writhed in pain, its form flickering. I crawled towards her, feeling the life drain from me with each passing second. Eliza thrust the mirror towards the figure, and with a final, desperate scream, it was sucked into the mirror once more. The room fell silent, the air clearing instantly. Eliza helped me to my feet, her face pale but determined. "We need to destroy this mirror," she said. "Completely, this time." Together, we drove to a remote quarry and shattered the mirror into countless pieces, scattering them far and wide. As we stood there, watching the sun rise, I finally felt a true sense of relief. The entity was gone, banished for good. But as we walked back to the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that a part of it had somehow survived, lingering in the shadows, waiting for its chance to return. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 3. The Cursed Diary. It started on a quiet afternoon, the kind where the sun hung lazily in the sky, casting a golden glow over everything. I was digging in the backyard, hoping to plant a small garden, when my shovel hit something hard. Curious, I knelt down and unearthed a small, dirt-caked box. It was old, the wood weathered and the metal hinges rusted. My heart raced with a mix of excitement and dread as I pried it open. Inside was a diary, its leather cover cracked and worn. I wiped the dirt off the cover and opened it. The first entry was dated nearly 50 years ago. The handwriting was elegant but faded. As I flipped through the pages, I felt a growing unease. The entries described mundane details, meals eaten, errands run, but gradually, they started to describe things that were eerily familiar. The details became more personal, more precise. It was as if the writer had been watching me, documenting my every move. I sat back, the diary resting on my lap, and took a deep breath. The last entry was dated the day before, describing how I had spent my evening reading a book by the fireplace. The final page was blank, except for today's date and a single sentence: "You shouldn't have read this." A chill ran down my spine. I slammed the diary shut and looked around, half expecting to see someone watching me. The yard was empty, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and distant chirping of birds. I took the diary inside, my mind racing with questions. Who had written this? How did they know so much about me? And why had they buried the diary in my backyard? I decided to investigate further. I called my friend Claire, who was a local historian, and asked if she knew anything about the previous owners of my house. She agreed to meet me at the library the next day. That night, sleep eluded me. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind, set my nerves on edge. I felt like I was being watched, my every move recorded in some unseen ledger. The next morning, Claire and I pored over old records and newspaper clippings. The house had a dark history, with a string of mysterious disappearances linked to its previous occupants. The most recent owner, a man named Edward Harrow, had vanished without a trace nearly a decade ago. His disappearance had never been solved. As I walked home, the weight of the diary in my bag felt like a leaden anchor, dragging me down. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled onto something far bigger than a forgotten journal. That evening, I sat down with the diary again, reading each entry more carefully. The writer's voice seemed to shift over time, becoming more frantic, more desperate. They wrote about hearing whispers, seeing shadows moving in the corners of their vision. I couldn't help but feel a connection to the writer's fear, their growing paranoia. I decided to record my own experiences, hoping to make sense of what was happening. As I wrote, the shadows in the room seemed to deepen, the air growing colder. I glanced at the clock, midnight. The house was silent, but the silence felt oppressive, like the calm before a storm. Suddenly, the lights flickered. I froze, my pen poised above the paper. The air grew heavy, and a faint whisper seemed to echo through the room. I strained to listen, but the words were unintelligible, just on the edge of hearing. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly turned around, half expecting to see someone standing there. The room was empty, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I knew I had to get to the bottom of this mystery, to find out who had written the diary and why they were so obsessed with me. Little did I know, my quest for answers would lead me down a path of terror and revelation, one that I might not survive. The morning light brought little comfort. The diary sat on my kitchen table like a silent sentinel, its secrets still whispering in the back of my mind. Claire called, her voice tinged with concern. "I found something strange," she said. Edward Harrow was involved in some kind of occult practices. There were rumors he was trying to communicate with the dead. Her words sent a shiver down my spine. What kind of practices? Rituals, seances. Apparently, he was obsessed with contacting a specific spirit. There's no record of who, but it seems he believed the spirit held the key to some great power or knowledge. I hung up, my mind racing. Could Edward Harrow's experiments be linked to the diary? I decided to search the house for more clues. Starting in the attic, I rummaged through dusty old boxes and trunks. Hours passed, and just as I was about to give up, I found a hidden compartment in the floorboards. Inside was a collection of old photographs, letters, and a small, intricately carved wooden box. The letters were from Harrow to someone named Lydia, filled with cryptic references to the ritual and the awakening. The photographs showed Harrow in various stages of his experiments, symbols drawn in chalk, candles burning, his face twisted in concentration or fear. The box, however, was the most intriguing. Inside was a small, ornate key and a note that read, "For the final door." Back in the living room, I spread out my findings, trying to piece together the puzzle. The diary, the letters, the photographs, all pointed to something dark and sinister. As I sat there, I felt a sudden chill. The room grew dim, the air thick with an unspoken tension. Then, I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, coming from the diary. I picked it up, hands trembling. The whisper grew louder, words forming out of the hissing noise. "You shouldn't have read this." The voice was cold, ancient, filled with malice. The temperature in the room plummeted, and I saw my breath mist in the air. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. The whisper continued, relentless. "You have opened the door. Now you must pay the price." "What door?" I demanded. "What do you want from me?" The diary's pages began to flip on their own, stopping at the last entry. Today's date was still there, but now a new sentence had appeared below the ominous warning: "Find the final door, or suffer my fate." I spent the next few hours scouring the house, looking for any door that might match the key. Finally, in the basement, hidden behind a false wall, I found it, a small, ancient door, almost blending into the stone. My heart pounded as I inserted the key and turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Armed with a flashlight and the crucifix from my grandmother, I descended. The air grew colder, and the sense of dread intensified with each step. At the bottom, I found a small, dimly lit chamber. Symbols covered the walls, and in the center of the room was an altar, draped in a tattered cloth. On the altar lay an old, leather-bound book, its cover adorned with the same intricate patterns as the diary. As I approached, the whispering returned, louder and more insistent. I hesitated, then reached for the book. The moment my fingers touched it, a shock of icy pain shot through me, and I was thrown back against the wall. The whispers turned into a cacophony of voices, all shouting, screaming, begging. In the midst of the chaos, a single voice rose above the rest. "You have awakened us. Now you must face the darkness." The room spun, and I felt myself slipping into unconsciousness. The last thing I saw was the altar, glowing with an unearthly light, and the shadowy figure of Edward Harrow standing over me, his eyes burning with malevolent intent. I woke up on the cold stone floor of the chamber, my head throbbing. The air was heavy with an oppressive silence, the whispers gone. I struggled to my feet, my flashlight flickering weakly. The book on the altar seemed to pulse with a dark energy, drawing me in. I knew I should leave, but I felt compelled to open it. With trembling hands, I lifted the cover. The pages were filled with strange symbols and diagrams, accompanied by descriptions in an ancient language. As I turned the pages, I began to understand. It was a grimoire, a guide to summoning and controlling spirits. Edward Harrow's voice echoed in my mind, warning of the dangers of meddling with such forces. Suddenly, the room grew colder, and I felt a presence behind me. I turned slowly, my heart pounding. There, emerging from the shadows, was Edward Harrow. His form was ghostly, his eyes hollow and filled with an unending sorrow. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice a haunting whisper. "You don't know what you've unleashed." "What do you mean?" I asked, fear gripping me. Harrow's form flickered, and he seemed to struggle for words. "I sought power, knowledge, but I was deceived. The spirits I summoned were not benevolent. They were ancient, evil, and now they are free." The weight of his words sank in. The diary, the grimoire, it was all connected. Harrow had opened a door to something dark, and I had unwittingly followed in his footsteps. How do I stop them? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "You must complete the ritual," Harrow replied. "The same ritual I started but failed to finish. Only then can the spirits be banished." He pointed to the grimoire, its pages now glowing with an eerie light. I turned to the final page, which contained a complex ritual, the instructions written in both ancient symbols and modern English. It required specific items and incantations, all to be performed at the stroke of midnight. I had no time to waste. I gathered the necessary items from around the house and the chamber: candles, herbs, a silver dagger, and a piece of obsidian. As the clock neared midnight, I felt the oppressive presence of the spirits growing stronger. Shadows danced on the walls, and whispers filled the air, their voices a cacophony of anger and fear. I began the ritual, reciting the incantations from the grimoire. The candles flickered, and the room seemed to pulse with energy. The shadows grew more frantic, swirling around me like a dark tempest. I pressed on, determined to see it through. As I reached the final incantation, the air grew thick with tension. I raised the silver dagger, its blade glinting in the candlelight, and plunged it into the obsidian. A blinding flash of light filled the room, and the shadows recoiled, their screams echoing in my mind. The light grew brighter, enveloping everything in its glow. When the light faded, the chamber was silent. The oppressive presence was gone, and the air felt lighter. I slumped to the floor, exhausted but relieved. The ritual had worked, the spirits were banished. But as I caught my breath, I noticed something odd. The grimoire's final page was blank, the incantations vanished. A cold realization washed over me. The spirits were not truly gone, they were merely contained, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to find the diary and repeat the cycle. I knew I had to ensure that no one else would fall into the same trap. I sealed the chamber and buried the grimoire in the deepest part of the forest, far from prying eyes. As I walked back to the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The shadows seemed to move with a life of their own, and the air was filled with a faint whispering. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. I kept the lights on, the diary locked away in a drawer. But the whispers returned, louder this time. "You shouldn't have read this," they echoed, filling the room with their chilling refrain. I knew then that the darkness was still with me, a shadow that would haunt me forever. The days following the ritual were a blur of restless nights and constant unease. The whispers haunted me, their ominous refrain growing louder with each passing night. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the shadows closing in, their malevolent presence suffocating me. I knew that burying the grimoire had not been enough. The spirits were still bound to me, and they would not rest until they had consumed my soul. Desperation drove me back to Claire. She met me at the library, her face pale and worried. "You look terrible," she said, her voice tinged with concern. "I can't escape them," I whispered, the fear evident in my eyes. "The spirits, they're still here." The ritual wasn't enough. Claire's expression darkened. "There must be something more, something we missed. Let's look through the records again, see if we can find anything about a final banishment." We spent hours combing through old documents and newspapers. Finally, buried in an obscure journal, we found a reference to a final ritual, one that could permanently sever the connection between the living and the spirits. It required not just a ritual but a sacrifice, a piece of the soul of the one who had awakened the spirits. "It's dangerous," Claire said, her voice trembling. "You could lose yourself completely." "I have no choice," I replied. "It's the only way to end this." That night, armed with the instructions for the final ritual, I returned to the hidden chamber. The air was thick with the presence of the spirits, their whispers a constant drone in my ears. I prepared the altar once more, placing the candles and herbs as instructed. This time, the ritual required a mirror, a conduit between the worlds of the living and the dead. As midnight approached, I stood before the mirror, the silver dagger in my hand. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. I began the incantation, my voice steady despite the terror gnawing at my heart. The mirror shimmered, and I saw the faces of the spirits trapped within, their eyes filled with hatred and longing. I continued the ritual, feeling a strange pull at my very essence, as if the spirits were drawing something from deep within me. The final part of the incantation required me to cut my palm and let my blood fall onto the mirror. As the first drop of blood hit the glass, the spirits screamed, their voices a cacophony of rage and pain. The mirror glowed with an unearthly light, and I felt a searing pain in my chest, as if my soul were being torn apart. The room spun, and I fell to my knees, the dagger slipping from my grasp. The light intensified, and the spirits' screams grew louder, filling my mind with their agony. Through the blinding light, I saw a figure emerge, Edward Harrow, his face twisted with sorrow and regret. "You must finish it," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the din. "Only you can end this." With the last of my strength, I reached for the dagger and plunged it into the center of the mirror. The glass shattered, and the room was filled with a deafening roar. The spirits were drawn into the shards, their forms dissipating into the void. The light faded, and I collapsed to the floor, the darkness closing in. I woke up in my bed, the morning sun filtering through the curtains. The house was silent, the oppressive presence gone. I felt an overwhelming sense of peace, as if a great weight had been lifted. The diary lay on the bedside table, its pages blank and harmless. Claire visited later that day, her relief palpable. "You did it," she said, hugging me tightly. "You ended it." I nodded, but deep down, I knew that the experience had changed me forever. The shadows were gone, but their memory lingered, a reminder of the darkness that had nearly consumed me. The diary was buried in the forest, far from prying eyes, but I knew that some secrets could never truly be laid to rest. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard a faint whisper, so soft it could have been the wind. "You shouldn't have read this." I closed my eyes, hoping for peace, but knowing that some nightmares never truly end. Story 4. The Haunting Echo. It was on a gloomy Saturday afternoon when I first stumbled upon the old cassette tape. I had been sorting through the clutter in the attic of my recently inherited house, a dilapidated old mansion that once belonged to my great-uncle. Amidst the dusty boxes and forgotten memorabilia, a small, unmarked cardboard box caught my attention. Inside was a single cassette tape, yellowed with age, with the simple yet ominous label, "Play Me." A shiver ran down my spine as I examined the tape. Despite my unease, curiosity got the better of me. I carried the tape downstairs to the study, where an ancient cassette player still sat on a shelf, a relic from another era. The room was dimly lit, shadows playing on the walls as I inserted the tape and pressed play. The tape crackled to life, a static hiss filling the room. At first, there was nothing but silence and the occasional pop and crackle of the old recording. Then, I heard it, my own voice, unmistakably me, having a conversation with myself. I recognized the topic immediately. It was a conversation I had in private just the night before, mulling over my plans for renovating the house. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the implications. How could this tape, clearly decades old, contain a recording of a conversation I had only yesterday? I continued to listen, my heart pounding in my chest. As my recorded voice discussed paint colors and furniture arrangements, a low, sinister laughter began to distort the background, growing louder and more menacing with each passing second. I stopped the tape, my hands shaking. This had to be some sort of elaborate prank, but I couldn't fathom who would go to such lengths to scare me. I decided to play the tape again, this time listening more closely for any clues. As my voice played back once more, I caught something I had missed before, faint whispers, barely audible beneath the laughter. They seemed to be repeating a name, but it was too distorted to make out clearly. Determined to uncover the truth, I played the tape over and over, straining to decipher the whispers. After what felt like hours, I finally made out the name, Evelyn. The name sent a jolt of recognition through me. Evelyn had been my great-uncle's wife, a woman who had mysteriously disappeared decades ago. Her sudden vanishing had always been a dark stain on the family history, one that no one ever talked about. Could it be possible that this tape was somehow connected to her disappearance? The thought sent chills down my spine. I needed answers, and I knew where to start. The old family records were stored in the library, a room I had yet to fully explore. I grabbed a flashlight and headed down the long, dim hallway, the shadows seeming to close in around me. The library was a cavernous room lined with dusty shelves, filled with books and documents dating back centuries. I began my search, pulling out old photo albums and diaries, looking for any mention of Evelyn. After hours of searching, I found a small, leather-bound diary belonging to my great-uncle. As I flipped through the pages, I discovered that his entries grew increasingly erratic in the months leading up to Evelyn's disappearance. He wrote of hearing strange voices and seeing shadows that shouldn't be there, of feeling watched even when he was alone. One entry, dated just a week before Evelyn vanished, stood out. Evelyn found an old cassette tape today, my great-uncle had written. It was labeled "Play Me." She played it, and ever since, she's been different. Distant. Frightened. I fear something dark has taken hold of her. My heart raced as I realized the connection. The tape I had found was the same one that had led to Evelyn's disappearance. Whatever dark force had haunted her was now targeting me. I needed to find out more, to uncover the truth behind the sinister laughter and whispers. As I stood there, the flashlight flickering in my hand, I heard a faint sound from the hallway. It was the same sinister laughter from the tape, echoing through the empty house. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt a cold dread settle over me. The presence that had haunted Evelyn was still here, and it was coming for me. The laughter seemed to follow me as I fled the library, my pulse pounding in my ears. The house felt more oppressive than ever, the shadows deepening, as if the walls themselves were closing in. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I decided to visit the local historical society, hoping to find more information about Evelyn and my great-uncle. The historical society was housed in a quaint, old building downtown. The curator, Mrs. Henderson, was a kind but inquisitive elderly woman. When I mentioned my great-uncle's name, her expression shifted to one of concern. "Ah, yes, the old Darnell house," she said, her voice tinged with apprehension. "There are many stories about that place." I explained the situation, carefully avoiding mention of the supernatural elements. Mrs. Henderson led me to the archives, where she pulled out a dusty file labeled "Darnell Family." We spent hours sifting through old documents and photographs, piecing together the history of the house and its inhabitants. I discovered that my great-uncle had been a well-respected man in the community, but after Evelyn's disappearance, he became reclusive, his mental state deteriorating rapidly. One article caught my eye. It detailed a search party organized to find Evelyn after she vanished. The search led them to an abandoned building on the outskirts of town, where they found evidence of a strange ritual. The building was later demolished, but whispers of dark practices persisted. My great-uncle had been linked to the site, though no formal charges were ever brought against him. "Do you know where that building was?" I asked Mrs. Henderson, my curiosity piqued. She nodded. "It was on the old Miller estate, now overgrown and abandoned. Be careful if you go there. People say it's cursed." Determined to uncover the truth, I drove to the Miller estate. The area was overgrown with weeds and thick underbrush, the remnants of the building barely visible among the foliage. As I explored the ruins, I found remnants of old candles and strange symbols etched into the stone floor. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. In a hidden alcove, I discovered a small, rusted box. Inside was another cassette tape, labeled "Final Message." My hands trembled as I picked it up, a sense of foreboding washing over me. I knew I had to listen to it, but the thought filled me with dread. Back at the house, I inserted the tape into the player and pressed play. The recording crackled to life, and I heard Evelyn's voice, soft and frightened. "If you're hearing this, it means the darkness has taken hold of you too," she began. "I don't know how much time I have left, but I need to warn you. The tape, the laughter, it's all connected to a spirit called Mershal. It feeds on fear and grows stronger with each soul it consumes." My blood ran cold as I realized the enormity of what I was facing. Evelyn's voice continued, explaining that Mershal had been summoned by my great-uncle in a misguided attempt to gain power. The spirit had attached itself to Evelyn, driving her to the brink of madness before ultimately consuming her. "The only way to banish it is to confront it directly," Evelyn said. "You must summon Mershal and speak its true name. Only then can you hope to break free." Her voice faded, replaced by the sinister laughter that had haunted me since I found the first tape. I knew what I had to do, but the thought terrified me. Summoning Mershal meant facing the darkness head-on, risking everything in a bid to end the haunting once and for all. I prepared for the confrontation, gathering candles, chalk, and anything else I might need for the ritual. The house seemed to pulse with malevolent energy as I drew the symbols on the floor and lit the candles. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper, as I took a deep breath and called out, "Marshall, I summon you." The temperature dropped sharply, and the shadows coalesced into a dark, menacing figure. Its eyes glowed with malevolent intelligence, and the sinister laughter filled the room. "You dare summon me?" Marshall hissed, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. I stood my ground, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I know your name, Marshall. I command you to leave." The entity recoiled, its form flickering as if struggling to maintain its shape. "You are brave," it sneered. "But bravery will not save you." The room shook, and the laughter grew louder, echoing off the walls. I felt a surge of fear, but I knew I had to stay strong. "Marshall, I banish you." I shouted, repeating its name with as much force as I could muster. The entity screamed, a sound of pure rage and pain. Its form twisted and writhed, the shadows dissipating as the room filled with blinding light. I covered my eyes, the intensity overwhelming. When I opened them again, the figure was gone, and the house was silent. For a moment, I thought it was over. But then, from the depths of the house, I heard a faint whisper, "It's not over yet." The whisper echoed in my mind, chilling me to the bone. I realized that Marshall's influence was not yet fully banished. There was something more I needed to understand, something deeper that connected the spirit to my family and this house. Exhausted but resolute, I decided to delve into the darkest corners of the mansion, hoping to uncover the final piece of the puzzle. I began my search in the basement, a labyrinthine warren of rooms and storage areas. The air was damp and musty, the shadows long and menacing. I turned on every light I could find, but it did little to dispel the darkness that seemed to cling to the walls. As I moved deeper into the basement, I found a door I had never noticed before, hidden behind a stack of old boxes. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open, revealing a narrow staircase leading further down into the earth. The air grew colder with each step, a palpable sense of dread settling over me. At the bottom of the stairs was a small, stone-walled chamber. In the center of the room, surrounded by old, faded symbols drawn on the floor, was an altar. On the altar lay an ancient book, bound in cracked, dark leather. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with handwritten notes and sketches. It was a grimoire, detailing rituals and summoning techniques. Flipping through the pages, I found numerous references to Marshall, describing it as a powerful, malevolent spirit that thrived on fear. The final entry in the grimoire caught my attention. It was written in my great-uncle's handwriting, detailing his desperate attempts to control Marshall. He described a final ritual, one that could bind the spirit permanently but required a great sacrifice. My heart sank as I read the final lines. Only through the ultimate act of courage can Marshall be defeated. The summoner must face the spirit in its true form and embrace the fear. The words filled me with a sense of foreboding. To truly banish Marshall, I would have to confront it in the place where it was strongest, the chamber where it had been summoned. I steeled myself for what was to come, knowing that failure meant losing my soul to the darkness. I gathered my resolve and returned to the main part of the basement, preparing the symbols and materials for the final ritual. The house seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, the shadows twisting and writhing as I worked. The air grew colder, and the sinister laughter began to echo through the halls once more. As the last candle was lit and the final symbol drawn, I felt Marshall's presence growing stronger. I stood in the center of the chamber, clutching the grimoire, my voice steady as I began to recite the incantation. The shadows around me coalesced into the dark, menacing figure of Marshall, its eyes burning with malevolent glee. "You dare summon me again?" it hissed, its voice filled with rage. "You cannot defeat me. I will consume your soul, just as I did with Evelyn." I felt a surge of fear but forced myself to remain calm. "Marshall, I know your true name, and I command you to leave this place. You have no power here." The entity laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "You are brave, but bravery alone will not save you. Embrace your fear, and you might have a chance." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath as I prepared for the ultimate confrontation. "Marshall, I banish you in the name of all that is good and pure. Leave this place and never return." The air crackled with energy as the shadows twisted and writhed. Marshall lunged at me, its form shifting and flickering as it tried to overwhelm me with fear. I stood my ground, repeating its name with every ounce of strength I had. The entity screamed, its voice filled with rage and pain, as the symbols on the floor began to glow with a brilliant light. The chamber shook, the walls cracking as the light intensified. I felt a surge of power, the energy of the ritual flowing through me. Marshall's form began to dissolve, the shadows dissipating as the light grew brighter. With one final, ear-piercing scream, the entity was sucked into the glowing symbols, the air around me stilling as silence fell. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sense of calm and peace. I knew that Marshall had been banished, its hold on the house and my family finally broken. As I lay there, catching my breath, I noticed something glinting on the altar. It was a locket, tarnished with age but still beautiful. Inside was a small photograph of Evelyn, her eyes filled with a sadness that spoke of the horrors she had endured. I took the locket, vowing to honor her memory and ensure that no one else would suffer as she had. Just as I began to feel a sense of closure, the air grew cold once more, and a faint whisper echoed through the chamber, "You may have won this battle, but the war is far from over." Story 5. Silent Watcher. It was a cold, dreary evening when I first stumbled upon the hidden room in my basement. I had been living in the old Victorian house for nearly 6 months, and it was on this particular night that a strange draft led me to the far corner of the basement, where I noticed a small, concealed door. It blended seamlessly with the stone wall, almost as if it was never meant to be found. Curiosity piqued, I pried the door open, revealing a narrow, dark staircase descending into the unknown. My heart pounded in my chest as I cautiously made my way down, each step creaking under my weight. The air grew colder and more oppressive with every step, and an unsettling silence enveloped me, broken only by the sound of my own breathing. At the bottom of the stairs, I found a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with what appeared to be countless old photographs. A single, naked bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a ghostly light over the space. I hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, a sense of dread creeping over me. I picked up the first photograph I saw, my hands trembling slightly. The image showed me lying in bed, asleep, with an eerie, serene expression on my face. My mind raced with questions. Who had taken these photos? And why? As I shuffled through the pictures, I realized they all depicted me in various stages of sleep, spanning years of my life. The horror of the situation began to sink in, my skin prickling with fear. The last photograph in the stack was different from the rest. It was recent, taken in the very room I had been sleeping in for the past few months. In this picture, my eyes were wide open, staring directly into the camera with a look of pure terror. I dropped the photograph, my heart pounding in my ears. Someone had been in my house, watching me, capturing these intimate moments without my knowledge. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I turned to leave the room. Suddenly, the light bulb flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I froze in place, feeling a presence behind me. Slowly, I turned around, my breath catching in my throat. In the dim light, I saw the faint outline of a figure standing in the corner, its eyes glowing with a malevolent intensity. "Who are you?" I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure remained silent, its gaze fixed on me. Panic surged through me as I backed away, stumbling up the stairs. The air grew colder, and the oppressive silence was broken by a faint whisper that seemed to echo in the darkness. "You should not have come here," the voice hissed, sending chills down my spine. I reached the top of the stairs, slamming the door shut behind me. My mind raced, and I felt the weight of the photographs in my hand. I knew I couldn't stay in the house, but I had to uncover the truth about who or what had been watching me all these years. Sleep was impossible after my discovery. I paced my room, mind racing, the images of those photographs seared into my brain. Every creak of the old house set my nerves on edge, each shadow seemed to hide a pair of watchful eyes. Exhausted but unable to rest, I decided to research the history of the house, hoping to find some explanation for the unsettling photos and the presence I had encountered. The local library provided little comfort. The house had changed hands numerous times over the past century, each owner leaving abruptly without explanation. There were no records of any crimes or tragedies, but the absence of information only deepened the mystery. Late into the night, I came across an old newspaper article that mentioned a reclusive photographer named Elias Graves who lived in the house during the early 1900s. He was known for his eerie, candid photographs of people in their most vulnerable states. Graves had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a legacy of unsettling art. I couldn't shake the feeling that Graves and the photographs were connected. As I returned home, the oppressive weight of the house seemed to bear down on me even more. I decided to delve deeper into the hidden room, despite my fear. I needed answers, and I felt compelled to confront whatever was haunting me. Armed with a flashlight and a crowbar, I descended the stairs once more. The air was even colder this time, and the silence seemed to thrum with a latent energy. I pried open the wooden panels behind the shelves, revealing a small crawlspace. Inside, I found an old leather-bound journal covered in dust and cobwebs. My hands shook as I opened it, the yellowed pages crackling under my touch. The journal belonged to Elias Graves. His entries were erratic, filled with ramblings about capturing the essence of his subjects' souls through his photography. He wrote of a dark figure that guided him, instructing him on how to elicit the perfect expressions of fear and vulnerability. My heart pounded as I read his final entry. The figure has chosen a new subject. It watches her as she sleeps, waiting for the right moment to capture her essence. She will lead it to the final masterpiece. My blood ran cold as I realized Graves had been referring to me. The figure had been watching me, just as it had watched his other subjects. I closed the journal, my mind reeling. I had to get out of this house, but first, I needed to destroy the room and everything in it. If I couldn't escape, perhaps I could at least break the cycle. As I gathered gasoline and matches from the garage, the house seemed to come alive around me. The walls creaked and groaned, shadows danced with malevolent glee. I hurried back to the basement, dousing the hidden room in fuel. The smell of gasoline was overpowering, but I didn't care. I struck a match, watching the flame flicker and dance before tossing it into the room. The fire roared to life, consuming the photographs and shelves with a hungry ferocity. The heat was intense, forcing me back up the stairs. As I reached the top, I heard a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the house. The malevolent presence was not pleased with my defiance. I stumbled into the living room, gasping for breath. The house shuddered around me, as if it were trying to expel me. I felt a cold hand brush against my neck, sending a jolt of terror through me. I spun around, but saw nothing. The whispers began again, louder this time, filling my head with a cacophony of voices. "You cannot escape," they hissed in unison, the sound wrapping around my mind like a vice. Panic gripped me as I realized the fire might not be enough to break the hold this presence had over me. I needed help, and fast, before the entity claimed me as its final masterpiece. I fled the house, my mind racing, desperate to find someone who could help me. My first thought was to contact a paranormal investigator. I needed someone who understood the darkness that had taken root in my home. I drove to the nearest town, my eyes darting nervously at every shadow, every fleeting movement in the corner of my vision. I found a small, nondescript office belonging to a paranormal investigator named Dr. Malcolm Ridgway. His reputation preceded him. He was known for dealing with the most malevolent of spirits. I burst into his office, barely coherent, but the urgency in my voice must have conveyed enough. He listened intently, his face growing more serious with every detail I shared. "Your house has a dark history," Dr. Ridgway said, his voice grave. "Elias Graves was known to have dabbled in the occult. It's possible he summoned something that now resides in your home, feeding off the fear and energy of its occupants." I felt a glimmer of hope. "Can you help me get rid of it?" Dr. Ridgway nodded. "I'll need to see the house and perform a cleansing ritual. But be warned, this entity won't let go easily. It will fight to keep its hold over you. We drove back to the house together, the oppressive atmosphere weighing heavily on us as we approached. The fire had burned out, but the air was still thick with smoke and the acrid scent of charred wood. Dr. Ridgway set up his equipment, lighting candles and placing symbols around the house. He began chanting in a low, rhythmic tone, the words foreign and unsettling. As the ritual progressed, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. A sudden, fierce wind whipped through the house, extinguishing the candles. The shadows seemed to grow darker, more substantial. A guttural voice echoed through the room, mocking and cruel. "You think you can banish me?" Dr. Ridgway continued chanting, his voice unwavering. The air crackled with energy, the very walls of the house vibrating with the force of the ritual. I felt a pressure building in my chest, as if the entity were trying to crush me from within. I clutched at my throat, struggling to breathe. Suddenly, the figure from the photographs appeared before us, its eyes burning with malevolent fury. It lunged at Dr. Ridgway, knocking him to the ground. The chanting stopped abruptly, and the oppressive silence returned. I rushed to his side, helping him to his feet. The figure loomed over us, its presence suffocating. "You cannot banish me," it hissed. "I am eternal." Dr. Ridgway's face was pale, but his eyes were determined. "We have to finish the ritual," he said, his voice strained. "It's the only way." We resumed the chanting together, our voices blending in a desperate attempt to expel the entity. The figure recoiled, its form flickering like a dying flame. The house shook violently, plaster cracking and falling from the walls. The oppressive darkness began to lift, the air growing lighter. With one final, defiant scream, the figure dissipated into a cloud of dark smoke, which was sucked out of the house as if by an invisible force. The room fell silent, the atmosphere returning to a semblance of normalcy. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. Dr. Ridgway placed a hand on my shoulder, offering a weary smile. "It's over," he said. "The house is cleansed." I wanted to believe him, to feel the weight lift from my shoulders, but something still felt wrong. The photographs were gone, the hidden room reduced to ashes, but the sense of unease lingered. As Dr. Ridgway packed his things, I noticed a photograph lying on the floor, untouched by the fire. It was the latest one, showing me with my eyes wide open, terror etched across my face. I picked it up, a cold chill running down my spine. The image seemed to move, the eyes flickering with a hint of life. I turned to Dr. Ridgway, my voice trembling. "It's not over, is it?" He looked at the photograph, his expression darkening. "No," he admitted. "This entity is powerful. It may have left the house, but it hasn't let go of you." Dr. Ridgway's words echoed in my mind as I stared at the photograph, my fear deepening. The entity had latched onto me, its grip tightening despite our efforts. I couldn't live with this constant terror, I needed to confront it directly. Dr. Ridgway sensed my resolve and, though hesitant, agreed to help me take the fight to the entity. "We need to find its origin," he said. "If Graves summoned it, there must be a way to banish it permanently." We began our search in the ruins of the hidden room. Among the ashes and charred remains, we found another journal, older and more sinister than the first. Graves had detailed his pact with the entity, a malevolent spirit that promised him artistic genius in exchange for human fear. The final entry was particularly chilling. The entity's true name grants control over it. Speak it, and its power wanes. The name, however, was smeared and illegible. Desperation clawed at me as I realized we were close yet so far from freeing ourselves. Dr. Ridgway suggested a seance to communicate with Graves directly, to uncover the entity's name. With no other options, I agreed, despite the inherent danger. We prepared for the seance that night. Candles cast flickering shadows across the room, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. Dr. Ridgway began the ritual, calling upon Elias Graves to reveal himself. The air grew colder, and a ghostly figure emerged from the darkness, its features twisted in eternal torment. "Why have you summoned me?" Graves' voice was a harsh whisper, filled with anguish. "We need the entity's name," I said, my voice trembling. Tell us how to banish it." Graves hesitated, his spectral form wavering. "You cannot banish what you have invited," he said. "But the name is the key." Dr. Ridgway pressed him, and finally, Graves relented. "Cipher," he whispered. "Speak the name with intent, and you can weaken it." With this newfound knowledge, we prepared for the final confrontation. Armed with the entity's name, we planned to lure it into a trap and banish it once and for all. The house seemed to sense our intent, the oppressive atmosphere intensifying as we readied ourselves. I could feel Cipher's malevolence lurking, waiting for its moment to strike. The moment came when I stood alone in my bedroom, the photograph clenched in my hand. "Cipher," I called out, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my insides. "I summon you." The temperature plummeted, and the shadows coalesced into the entity's form. Its eyes burned with hatred, and it lunged at me with a feral growl. I stood my ground, repeating its name with every ounce of strength I had. "Cipher! Cipher!" Dr. Ridgway joined me, his voice merging with mine in a powerful chant. The entity shrieked, its form flickering and wavering under the force of its true name. It writhed in agony, the sound reverberating through the house. The walls trembled, and the air crackled with energy as we continued our chant. "You cannot defeat me!" Cipher roared, its voice a mix of fury and desperation. But we persisted, our voices unwavering. Slowly, Cipher's form began to dissipate, the shadows retreating as its power waned. With one final, ear-piercing scream, the entity exploded into a cloud of dark smoke, which was sucked out of the house by an invisible force. Silence fell, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by an eerie calm. Dr. Ridgway and I stood in stunned silence, the weight of what we had accomplished settling over us. The house felt different, lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted. I glanced at the photograph in my hand, now blank and lifeless. Cipher was gone. Or so I thought. As I turned to thank Dr. Ridgway, a cold breeze swept through the room. The candles flickered, and in the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow move. My heart skipped a beat as I realized the truth. Cipher had not been banished completely. It was still there, waiting, watching. Dr. Ridgway caught my eye, his expression mirroring my own dread. "It's not over," he whispered, confirming my deepest fear. "We may have weakened it, but Cipher will find a way back." And so, the fight was not over. The entity's presence lingered, a constant reminder of the darkness that had touched my life. I knew I would have to remain vigilant, ready to confront Cipher again if it ever returned. The battle was far from finished, and the shadows still held their secrets. Story 6. The Living Room Haunting. I had never given much thought to the old painting in my living room. It had been there when I moved in, a seemingly benign portrait of a serene countryside. The soft, pastel hues and the peaceful scenery gave the room a comforting, if somewhat dated, ambience. But lately, something about the painting had changed. At first, it was subtle, an unusual shadow here, a strange glint there, but soon, the changes became impossible to ignore. One evening, as I settled into my armchair with a book, I noticed a figure in the painting that hadn't been there before. It was a small, dark silhouette standing near the edge of the forest depicted in the background. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but the figure remained. A chill ran down my spine as I stared at it, trying to make sense of its sudden appearance. Milo, my ever-faithful German shepherd, growled softly at the painting, his eyes fixed on the shadowy figure. "What's wrong, boy?" I murmured, reaching out to scratch behind his ears. His growl deepened, and he took a cautious step forward, his hackles raised. The unease in my stomach grew. I approached the painting, my heart pounding in my chest. Up close, the figure was even more unsettling. It seemed to shift and flicker, as though caught between this world and another. The serene countryside now felt ominous, the trees casting twisted shadows across the landscape. My fingers trembled as I reached out to touch the canvas. It was cold to the touch, almost freezing, and I jerked my hand back in shock. Determined to remove the painting, I took it down from the wall and placed it in the attic, covering it with an old blanket. Milo watched me the entire time, his eyes never leaving the canvas. "There," I said, more to myself than to him. "That should do it." Feeling a sense of relief, I returned to the living room, hoping the strange figure would haunt me no more. But the next morning, the painting was back in its original place. My heart sank as I stared at it, the figure now closer to the foreground, its features more defined. It was a man, his face twisted in a grotesque expression of pain and fear. Blood stained his clothes, and his eyes seemed to bore into mine, filled with silent screams. Milo barked furiously at the painting, his teeth bared. Panic surged through me. How had it returned? I rushed to the attic, but the space where I had placed the painting was empty. The blanket lay undisturbed, as though nothing had ever been there. My hands shook as I retraced my steps, trying to rationalize the impossible. Determined to end this madness, I took the painting to the basement, sealing it behind a locked door. That night, I barely slept, haunted by nightmares of the man in the painting, his screams echoing in my mind. When morning came, my heart raced as I entered the living room, dreading what I might find. The painting was there, back on the wall. The man's figure was now at the very center, surrounded by scenes of violence and horror. Blood dripped from the canvas, pooling on the floor beneath it. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. This was no ordinary painting. It was a window into something dark and malevolent, something that would not rest until its secrets were revealed. Hey, subscribe for more scary stories. The painting's horrifying transformation left me shaken. Each morning, I would find it back in its place, no matter where I tried to hide or destroy it. The scenes within it grew progressively more violent, depicting acts of unimaginable horror. The once peaceful countryside was now a hellscape of tortured souls and grotesque figures. The man at the center became the focal point of these atrocities, his eyes pleading with me for help. Milo became more agitated with each passing day. He would bark and growl at the painting, his body tense and ready to attack. I could barely keep him away from it, and I was growing more desperate. One night, I decided to seek answers. I searched online for anything that might explain the painting's behavior. After hours of fruitless searching, I stumbled upon a forum dedicated to haunted objects. One post in particular caught my eye. "Beware the painting that changes. It is a portal to the other side, a gateway for the restless dead. To stop its curse, you must uncover its origin and lay the spirits to rest." This was my only lead. The next day, I took a closer look at the painting, searching for any clues about its origin. In the bottom right corner, nearly hidden by the darkening scenes of horror, I found a small, almost illegible signature, H. Blackwood, 1897. With a name and a date, I had a place to start. I spent the next few days digging into historical records and archives. The name H. Blackwood led me to a reclusive artist named Henry Blackwood, who had lived in the area in the late 19th century. His works were known for their unsettling themes and dark imagery. The more I learned about him, the more I realized that his life had been shrouded in mystery and tragedy. Henry Blackwood had been accused of practicing dark rituals and consorting with malevolent spirits. He vanished under mysterious circumstances in 1898, shortly after completing his final work, my painting. The locals believed he had been consumed by the very forces he had sought to control. The stories were chilling, but they provided no clear solution to my predicament. One night, as I pored over my notes, the power went out again. The house plunged into darkness, and Milo started growling at the painting. I grabbed a flashlight and headed to the living room, my heart racing. The beam of light revealed the painting had changed once more. The man was now reaching out of the canvas, his hand extending towards me as if trying to escape. A sudden chill filled the room, and the whispers began. They were faint at first, but grew louder and more distinct. "Help us, free us," they begged. My breath caught in my throat. The voices were coming from the painting, the tortured souls trapped within it. Desperate to end this nightmare, I decided to follow the whispers. They seemed to guide me, leading me to the basement where I had last hidden the painting. In the corner of the room, beneath a loose floorboard, I found an old, weathered book. Its cover was adorned with the same dark symbols that lined the painting. I opened the book, revealing pages filled with Henry Blackwood's frantic writings and illustrations. Among the pages, I found a ritual, a way to break the curse and release the trapped spirits. The instructions were cryptic, but I had no other choice. I gathered the necessary items and prepared for the ritual, hoping it would finally put an end to the horrors. As I stood in front of the painting, the whispers grew louder, more desperate. I began the ritual, chanting the incantations from the book. The room grew colder, and the painting started to glow with an eerie light. The figures within it writhed and twisted, their screams echoing in my mind. Just as I finished the final incantation, the power returned, and the house was filled with a deafening silence. The painting no longer depicted scenes of horror. Instead, it showed the serene countryside once more. The man at the center was gone, and the air felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. For the first time in weeks, Milo was calm. He lay at my feet, his eyes closing in peaceful sleep. I breathed a sigh of relief, hoping that the nightmare was finally over. But as I turned to leave the room, I noticed something chilling, the man's shadow, faint but unmistakable, lingering in the background. The days following the ritual were eerily calm. The painting remained unchanged, depicting the peaceful countryside without any trace of the previous horrors. Milo seemed more relaxed, no longer growling or barking at the walls. For a while, I dared to hope that the nightmare was truly over. But the lingering shadow in the background of the painting never left my mind. One night, as I sat in the living room, I noticed a chill creeping into the air. The temperature dropped rapidly, and the lights flickered. Milo lifted his head, ears perked, and began to growl low in his throat. I looked up at the painting and froze. The shadow was no longer faint, it was darker, more defined, and it seemed to be moving. Panic gripped me as the room grew colder. I grabbed the book I had found in the basement, flipping through its pages for any clues I might have missed. The shadows on the walls seemed to dance, forming shapes and figures that loomed ever closer. Milo barked furiously, his eyes fixed on the painting. Suddenly, the whispers returned, louder and more menacing than before. "You failed," they hissed. "He is not free." My hands trembled as I reread the ritual's instructions. Had I done something wrong? The shadows seemed to close in, and I realized with growing horror that I had only completed part of the ritual. There was a final step I had overlooked. In the book, written in almost invisible ink at the bottom of the last page, was a single, chilling sentence: "To seal the curse, you must confront the darkness within." I stared at the words, my heart pounding. What did it mean? How could I confront a shadow, a presence that defied all logic and reality? Determined to end this once and for all, I steeled myself and approached the painting. The shadow seemed to pulse with a life of its own, growing larger and more ominous. Milo barked and growled, but I kept him at a distance, knowing I had to face this alone. With a deep breath, I reached out and touched the canvas. A jolt of electricity shot through me, and I was pulled into the painting. The serene countryside was gone, replaced by a dark, twisted landscape. The trees were gnarled and dead, and the sky was a swirling mass of black clouds. The shadow stood before me, no longer a mere outline but a fully formed figure with glowing red eyes. "You have come," it whispered, its voice echoing all around me. "But you cannot win. This place is mine." Gathering all my courage, I spoke the final incantation from the book, my voice trembling but determined. The shadow recoiled, its form flickering and shifting. "You do not belong here," I shouted, taking a step forward. "You must leave this place and never return." The ground beneath me shook, and the sky darkened further. The shadow lunged, but I held my ground, repeating the incantation over and over. The air crackled with energy, and the shadow let out a deafening roar. The world around me seemed to implode, and I was thrown backward, the darkness swallowing everything. I awoke on the living room floor, the painting hanging on the wall above me. Milo licked my face, whimpering softly. The room was warm, the air filled with the faint scent of burnt ozone. I looked up at the painting and saw that the shadow was gone. The countryside was serene once more, and the figures within it were peaceful. Exhausted, I lay back, breathing a sigh of relief. Milo curled up beside me, finally at ease. The whispers were gone, the shadows banished. I had confronted the darkness and won. Or so I thought. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me, lurking just out of sight. The final words of the incantation echoed in my mind: "You must leave this place and never return." But what if the shadow found a way back? What if it was waiting for the right moment to strike again? Story 7. Haunting in the Attic. I always found comfort in the old house on Elm Street, with its creaky wooden floors and charming, if somewhat antiquated, architecture. However, one peculiar thing about it had always puzzled me. Max, my usually fearless Doberman, flat out refused to go anywhere near the attic. Whenever I tried to coax him up those narrow stairs, he would growl and bark furiously, digging his claws into the floorboards in defiance. Last night, something changed. As I lay in bed, the sound of scratching echoed from above. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but grew louder and more insistent as the minutes passed. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened, straining to make sense of the noise. Was it a rat? A raccoon? Or something else entirely? Max seemed to sense my unease. He stood at the foot of the attic stairs, his ears pinned back and his hackles raised, emitting a low, continuous growl. "What's wrong, boy?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the scratching. His response was a sharp bark, his eyes fixed on the attic door as if daring whatever was behind it to come out. Summoning my courage, I decided to investigate. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and slowly ascended the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. The air grew colder as I neared the top, and the scratching grew louder, more frantic. My hand trembled as I reached for the attic door's handle, the flashlight's beam dancing wildly across the wooden panels. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, musty space cluttered with forgotten relics and dusty old furniture. I swept the flashlight around, half expecting to see glowing eyes staring back at me. But there was nothing, just shadows and silence. The scratching had stopped. I took a cautious step forward, my heart in my throat. "Hello?" I called out, feeling foolish immediately after. There was no response. I explored the attic, moving aside boxes and peering into corners, but found nothing unusual. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed something odd, an old, tattered rug in the center of the floor, slightly askew. Kneeling down, I moved the rug aside and discovered a small, wooden trapdoor. My curiosity piqued. I pried it open, revealing a narrow, steep staircase descending into darkness. The air that wafted up was damp and cold, carrying with it a faint, musty odor. Max, still at the top of the attic stairs, barked furiously, his eyes wide with fear. A chill ran down my spine as I stared into the abyss. What was down there? And why had Max been so terrified of this place? My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I knew I should close the trapdoor and forget I ever saw it, but something compelled me to keep going. I hesitated at the edge of the trapdoor, peering into the darkness below. The staircase seemed to descend endlessly, swallowed by shadows. Max's barking echoed in the attic, a stark reminder that something was profoundly wrong. Taking a deep breath, I stepped onto the first creaky stair, feeling the weight of the unknown pressing down on me. As I descended, the air grew colder and damper, carrying an eerie silence that seemed to absorb all sound. The flashlight flickered again, and I gripped it tighter, praying it wouldn't die on me. Each step felt like a leap into the abyss, the darkness pressing in from all sides. About halfway down, I started hearing them, soft whispers, indistinct and barely audible. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a ghostly chorus that sent shivers down my spine. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. The whispers paused for a moment, then resumed, slightly louder, more insistent. Finally, I reached the bottom. The small room I found myself in was nothing like the rest of the house. The walls were lined with old, moldy bricks, and the floor was cold, damp concrete. In the center stood an old, wooden table, covered in dust and cobwebs. On it lay an assortment of objects, a rusted key, a torn photograph, and a small, leather-bound book. I approached the table cautiously, my heart pounding in my ears. Picking up the photograph, I wiped away the dust to reveal the image of a family, a man, a woman, and a young girl, all smiling brightly. There was something unsettling about their eyes, though, something that made me shudder. They seemed to be staring straight at me, their smiles twisted into something sinister. Next, I turned my attention to the book. Its leather cover was cracked and worn, the pages yellowed with age. I opened it, revealing page after page of handwritten notes, diagrams, and strange symbols. As I flipped through the pages, a sense of dread washed over me. The handwriting grew increasingly frantic, the notes more cryptic and disturbing. One passage caught my eye. "They are here. They whisper in the dark, waiting, watching. The key must never be used. It must remain hidden, for their return will bring only death and despair." A sudden noise made me jump, a soft, shuffling sound from behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam sweeping across the room, but saw nothing. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, filling my head with their eerie, unintelligible murmurs. My pulse raced as I felt a presence, something unseen but undeniably there, watching me. With trembling hands, I grabbed the key from the table and backed away, my eyes darting around the room. The whispers intensified, merging into a cacophony of voices, each one filled with malice and despair. I stumbled up the stairs, desperate to escape, the darkness closing in around me. When I finally burst through the attic door, Max was there, his barking frantic. I slammed the door shut, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Whatever I had disturbed, whatever lay hidden beneath the house, was now awake. And it was coming for me. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and mounting dread. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even during the brightest hours of the day. Max never left my side, his usually playful demeanor replaced by constant vigilance. He would growl at shadows, his eyes always darting to the attic door. One evening, as I sat in the living room trying to make sense of the cryptic notes from the leather-bound book, I heard it again, the scratching. This time, it was louder, more insistent. Max immediately jumped to his feet, his hackles raised as he barked furiously at the ceiling. My heart raced, the key I had found feeling like a lead weight in my pocket. I knew I had to confront whatever was in the attic. With Max close behind, I climbed the stairs, flashlight in hand. The whispers began as soon as I reached the top, more distinct now, filled with a sense of urgency. The attic door creaked open, revealing the trapdoor in the floor. Taking a deep breath, I opened it and descended once more into the dark, musty room below. The objects on the table were exactly as I had left them, but this time, I noticed something new, a faint glow emanating from the walls, pulsing like a heartbeat. The whispers grew louder, forming words that sent chills down my spine. "Free us," they pleaded. "Release us." As I approached the table, the key in my pocket grew warmer. I pulled it out, feeling its strange energy pulsate in my hand. The whispers reached a fever pitch, urging me to use the key, to unlock whatever had been hidden away for so long. My instincts screamed at me to run, but something stronger, a deep, inexplicable compulsion, drove me forward. I noticed a small, rusted lock on the far wall, almost hidden behind a stack of old crates. With trembling hands, I inserted the key into the lock. It turned easily, despite its age, and the wall shifted, revealing a hidden doorway. A cold breeze wafted out, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of decay. Beyond the doorway lay a narrow, dimly lit corridor. The walls were lined with ancient symbols, their meanings lost to time but emanating a palpable sense of dread. Max refused to follow me any further, whimpering at the threshold. "Stay here, boy," I whispered, hoping to calm him. "I'll be back soon." As I ventured deeper into the corridor, the whispers followed, guiding me. The air grew colder, and my breath formed clouds in the dim light. At the end of the passage, I found myself in a small, circular chamber. In the center stood an old, stone pedestal, and atop it, a large, intricately carved box. The box seemed to hum with energy, the symbols on its surface glowing faintly. The whispers became a single voice, clear and commanding, "Open it." My hands shook as I lifted the lid, revealing a dark, swirling void inside. The room seemed to tilt, and I felt myself being pulled toward the darkness. Just as I was about to be consumed, a blinding light filled the chamber, and a deafening roar echoed through the corridor. The force knocked me backward, slamming the box shut. The whispers ceased, replaced by an oppressive silence. Gasping for breath, I scrambled to my feet and fled the chamber, the door slamming shut behind me. When I emerged from the trapdoor, Max was there, barking furiously at the now locked door. My mind raced with questions. What had I almost unleashed? And why did it feel like I had only just begun to unravel the house's dark secrets? The days that followed were filled with an unbearable tension. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. The whispers had stopped, but the oppressive silence was almost worse. Max stayed by my side, his constant vigilance a reminder that the danger was far from over. One night, as I sat in the living room, trying to decipher the last, cryptic notes in the book, the power went out. The sudden darkness was complete, and the house seemed to hold its breath. Max growled low in his throat, his eyes fixed on the attic door. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I knew I had to face whatever was lurking in the shadows once and for all. With a flashlight in hand and Max at my side, I ascended the stairs to the attic. The air was colder than ever, and my breath formed visible puffs in the dim light. The attic door opened with a groan, revealing the trapdoor. I steeled myself, determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Descending into the dark room once more, I noticed something I hadn't before, faint footprints in the dust, leading to the hidden doorway. The whispers had left me with one final command: remember the box. The key in my pocket felt like a burning coal, urging me forward. In the hidden chamber, the stone pedestal stood empty, the box gone. Panic set in as I realized someone, or something, had taken it. The whispers returned, a cacophony of desperate pleas and warnings. Find it, they urged. Stop them. Following the footprints, I made my way through the house, the oppressive silence broken only by Max's growls. The trail led me to the basement, a place I had rarely visited. The air was thick with dampness and decay, the walls lined with forgotten relics. In the corner, a faint light flickered. There, in the basement's darkest recess, I found it, the box, open and empty. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Whatever had been contained within was now free. A sense of dread washed over me as I turned to leave, but the basement door slammed shut, trapping me in the darkness. The whispers grew louder, forming a single, terrifying voice. You have failed, it hissed. Now face the consequences. A cold hand clamped down on my shoulder, and I spun around, the flashlight beam revealing a shadowy figure, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent. Max barked furiously, launching himself at the figure. The room filled with a blinding light, and a deafening roar shook the walls. I stumbled backward, feeling the ground give way beneath me. As I fell into the darkness, the last thing I saw was Max, standing defiantly against the shadow. I awoke in my bed, drenched in sweat, the house eerily silent. Max lay beside me, his fur matted with blood. The attic door was closed, the trapdoor sealed. The whispers were gone, replaced by a profound, unsettling quiet. The leather-bound book lay on my nightstand, its pages blank. I knew then that the house's dark secrets had not been fully revealed, that something still lurked in the shadows, waiting. As I sat up, the room grew colder, and a familiar scratching sound echoed from above. The nightmare was far from over. Story 8. Unseen Guest. It all started on a crisp autumn evening, a week after my grandmother's funeral. We had gathered at my parents' old Victorian house to sort through her belongings. Among the dusty relics and musty-smelling antiques, I discovered a worn, leather-bound photo album tucked away in the attic. As I flipped through the yellowed pages, I stumbled upon a Polaroid picture that sent a shiver down my spine. The photo depicted a family gathering in our living room, taken years ago when I was just a child. My parents, my older sister, and I were all smiling at the camera. But there, standing just behind us, was a tall, shadowy figure, its features obscured in the dim light. I rubbed my eyes and squinted, thinking it must be a trick of the light or a smudge on the photo. But no matter how hard I looked, the figure remained, its presence unsettling and unmistakable. "Hey, Mom," I called, descending the creaky attic stairs. "Do you remember this photo?" I handed her the Polaroid, my heart pounding in my chest. She took a moment to adjust her glasses and scrutinized the picture. To my surprise, her expression remained neutral. "Of course, dear," she said, handing it back to me. "That was taken during your 6th birthday party. Why do you ask? Do you see anything unusual in the background?" I pressed, my voice wavering slightly. She shook her head, her brow furrowing in confusion. "No, just us." "Why? Is there something wrong?" I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "There's a figure standing behind us. A tall, dark figure. You really don't see it?" Mom laughed lightly, dismissing my concern with a wave of her hand. "You're just imagining things, sweetheart. It must be a shadow or something. There's nothing there." Unsatisfied and increasingly uneasy, I showed the photo to my dad and sister. Both gave me similar responses, assuring me that it was just an old picture and there was nothing to worry about. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. That night, I lay in bed, the image of the shadowy figure burned into my mind. Who or what was it? Why couldn't anyone else see it? As the days passed, my obsession with the photo grew. I began to notice small, strange occurrences around the house, footsteps in empty rooms, doors creaking open on their own, and a chilling draft that seemed to follow me wherever I went. Each night, I dreamed of the shadowy figure, standing closer and closer to my bed, its indistinct face looming over me. One evening, unable to bear the anxiety any longer, I decided to investigate further. I took the photo to a local historian who specialized in the paranormal. His office was cluttered with books on ghosts and the supernatural, and the walls were lined with eerie photographs and artifacts. I handed him the Polaroid, my hands trembling. He examined it closely, his expression growing grim. "This is not just a trick of the light," he said finally, looking up at me with grave eyes. "What you're seeing is a manifestation. A spirit, if you will. And it seems to have a strong connection to your family." My blood ran cold at his words. "What do you mean? Why is it in the photo?" He sighed deeply. "Spirits often attach themselves to families for various reasons. Sometimes it's a past wrong that needs to be righted. Other times, it's simply a matter of unfinished business." As I left his office, my mind raced with questions and fears. Who was the figure in the photo? What did it want from us? And why was I the only one who could see it? Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt me and my family. Hey, subscribe for more scary stories. The following weeks were a blur of restless nights and eerie encounters. I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadowy figure was somehow linked to my grandmother's death. Desperate for answers, I delved into our family's history, scouring old letters, diaries, and documents for any clues that might explain the mysterious apparition. One evening, as I pored over my grandmother's journals, I stumbled upon a passage that made my heart skip a beat. She had written about a strange encounter she had experienced as a young girl. She described seeing a tall, dark figure standing at the foot of her bed, watching her with hollow eyes. The description matched the shadowy figure in the Polaroid exactly. I called my sister, Lily, and asked her to come over. We needed to talk. When she arrived, I showed her the journal entry and the photo once more. "Lily, this can't be a coincidence. Grandma saw the same figure. There has to be something more to this." Lily's face paled as she read the passage. "This is unsettling, to say the least. But what can we do about it? It's just a photo and a journal entry from years ago." "It's not just a photo, Em. I think this thing is still here, in the house. I've been hearing things, feeling its presence. We need to find out what it wants, I insisted, my voice trembling. That night, Lily agreed to stay over. We decided to hold a seance, hoping to make contact with the spirit and learn more about its intentions. We gathered in the living room, the same place where the Polaroid had been taken, and lit a circle of candles around us. I held my grandmother's rosary tightly, praying for protection. As we began the seance, the room grew colder and the candles flickered violently. We called out to the spirit, asking it to reveal itself. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, the temperature dropped even further, and a chilling breeze swept through the room. The candles went out, plunging us into darkness. Lily clutched my hand tightly. "Are you sure about this? Maybe we should stop." But before I could respond, a deep, guttural voice echoed through the room. "Why have you summoned me?" We both gasped, looking around frantically. The shadowy figure materialized before us, more distinct than ever. Its eyes glowed with an eerie light, and its presence filled the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. "Who are you? What do you want from us?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure seemed to hover, its form shifting and flickering like a candle in the wind. "I am bound to this family by a curse. Your grandmother's actions in the past have tethered me to you all." Lily and I exchanged terrified glances. "What did she do? How can we break the curse?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. The figure's eyes burned brighter. "Seek out the truth. Only then can the curse be lifted. But beware, the path to the truth is fraught with danger." With that, the figure vanished, leaving us in stunned silence. The candles flickered back to life, casting eerie shadows on the walls. We sat there, trying to process what had just happened. Our grandmother had somehow cursed our family, binding this malevolent spirit to us. But why? And how could we possibly uncover the truth? As we cleaned up and prepared for bed, the weight of the spirit's warning hung heavily over us. The danger it spoke of felt all too real, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. That night, I dreamed of the shadowy figure again, its eyes burning into mine as it whispered dark secrets I couldn't quite understand. Morning brought no relief. We were more determined than ever to uncover the truth and break the curse. But the closer we got to the answers, the more dangerous our situation became. Little did we know, we were about to uncover a family secret so dark, it would threaten to tear us apart. Lily and I spent the next few days combing through every inch of our grandmother's house, hoping to find some clue that would explain the curse and the malevolent spirit. The attic, filled with her old belongings, seemed the most promising place to search. We waded through dusty boxes and forgotten heirlooms, each discovery adding to the tapestry of our family's history. On the third day, tucked away behind a stack of old suitcases, we found a small, locked chest. Its wood was darkened with age, and an intricate design of vines and thorns was carved into its surface. With some effort, we managed to pry it open. Inside, we found a collection of letters, photographs, and a worn leather-bound book. The letters were addressed to our grandmother from someone named Eliza, dating back over 70 years. As we read through the letters, a chilling story began to unfold. Eliza had been a close friend of our grandmother, but their relationship had turned sour after a tragic incident. According to the letters, Eliza and our grandmother had dabbled in dark rituals, seeking to communicate with the dead. One night, they had attempted a particularly dangerous ritual, summoning a spirit that refused to leave. This spirit, angered by being called forth, had attached itself to our family, vowing to haunt our bloodline until retribution was made. In the book, we found detailed descriptions of the rituals they had performed, along with warnings and accounts of their disastrous consequences. One passage, in particular, caught my eye. It described a way to bind a spirit, but also a way to release it. The instructions were vague and filled with ominous warnings, but it seemed to be our only hope. Lily looked at me, her face pale. "We have to do this. We have to try and set it free. Otherwise, it'll keep haunting us." I nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. We need to follow the instructions exactly. If we mess this up, who knows what will happen? That night, we prepared for the ritual. We gathered the necessary items, candles, herbs, and a piece of our grandmother's clothing. We set up in the living room, the same place where the Polaroid had been taken, and began the ceremony. The air grew thick with tension as we chanted the ancient words, hoping to summon the spirit one last time. The temperature dropped once again, and the shadowy figure appeared before us, its eyes burning with anger. "Why have you called me?" it demanded, its voice echoing through the room. "We're here to release you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We know about the curse. We want to set you free." The figure seemed to waver, its form flickering. "You think you can break the curse so easily? The price must be paid." "What price?" Lily asked, her voice shaking. "What do we have to do?" The figure's eyes glowed brighter. "A life for a life. One of you must stay with me, forever." A cold dread settled over us. The realization of the spirit's demand hit us like a punch to the gut. We had to make a choice. One of us had to sacrifice our life to break the curse and free the spirit. The room fell silent as we absorbed the gravity of the situation. Lily's hand gripped mine tightly. "I'll do it," she whispered. "I can't let this thing haunt us anymore. I won't let it hurt you or anyone else." "No, Lily," I said, my voice breaking. "We have to find another way. There has to be another way." But deep down, I knew the spirit was telling the truth. The curse could only be broken with a life. As the shadowy figure loomed closer, I realized that our time was running out. The choice had to be made, and it had to be made now. The spirit watched us with its burning eyes, waiting for our decision. The weight of its gaze was unbearable, and the room seemed to close in around us. We were on the brink of a decision that would change our lives forever. And as the moment of truth approached, the darkness around us grew even more suffocating, threatening to consume us entirely. The silence stretched, each heartbeat pounding in my ears like a death knell. Lily's grip tightened, her determination etched into her face. I felt a surge of protectiveness and desperation. I couldn't let her do this. I had to find another way, any way, to save her. "Wait," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "If you need a life, take mine instead. Spare my sister." Lily turned to me, her eyes wide with shock and fear. "No, you can't. I won't let you do this. We've come this far together. We'll find another way." The shadowy figure remained motionless, its eyes fixed on us with a predatory intensity. "The choice is yours," it said, its voice a whisper that seemed to echo in my very bones. "But choose quickly, or I will take you both." In that moment, I realized the truth. This spirit was feeding off our fear and indecision. It thrived on our suffering. I had to be strong, not just for myself, but for Lily. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what had to be done. "Lily," I said softly, "I love you. But this is the only way. Take care of Mom and Dad. Tell them I'm sorry." Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head. "No, I won't let you. I can't lose you too." I hugged her tightly, feeling the warmth of her body, the life that still flowed through her. "You have to. Please, promise me you'll be strong." With a heavy heart, I turned back to the spirit. "I'm ready. Take me." The figure seemed to grow larger, its eyes burning brighter. It reached out a shadowy hand, and I felt an icy grip on my soul. The room began to spin, and darkness closed in around me. Lily's sobs echoed in the distance, growing fainter with each passing second. Suddenly, a blinding light filled the room. The shadowy figure recoiled, its form flickering and wavering. I blinked, trying to understand what was happening. The light grew brighter, and I saw a figure stepping into the room, my grandmother, her face serene and filled with a gentle radiance. "Enough," she said, her voice firm and commanding. "This ends now." The shadowy figure writhed, its form distorting. "You cannot interfere. The curse must be fulfilled." My grandmother shook her head. The curse was never meant to harm. It was a mistake, a moment of foolishness. I take full responsibility. Release my grandchildren and take me instead." The figure hesitated, then slowly began to fade. "Very well," it said, its voice a mere whisper now. "The debt is paid." With a final, agonizing cry, the shadowy figure vanished, leaving only the fading echoes of its presence. The room grew warmer, and the oppressive weight lifted. I stumbled forward, feeling weak and disoriented, but alive. Lily rushed to my side, her face streaked with tears. "You're okay." "Oh my God, you're okay." We turned to our grandmother, her form shimmering with a soft, ethereal glow. "Grandma," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Thank you." She smiled, a bittersweet expression on her face. "I'm sorry for the pain I've caused. But now, you are free. Live your lives well, and remember that love is stronger than any curse." With that, she began to fade, the light growing dimmer until it disappeared completely. We stood there, holding each other, overwhelmed by the events that had just transpired. In the days that followed, the house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the strange occurrences ceased. Lily and I spent hours talking, processing everything we had learned and experienced. We vowed to honor our grandmother's sacrifice by living our lives to the fullest, cherishing every moment. Though the shadowy figure was gone, its memory lingered, a reminder of the darkness that once haunted our family. But it also served as a testament to the power of love and sacrifice. As we moved forward, we carried our grandmother's spirit with us, a guiding light in the face of any darkness that might come our way. The nightmare was over, but its lessons remained. We had faced the unseen guest and emerged stronger, bound by a love that could never be broken. The end. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Thanks for watching.